Saludos amigos, amigas, buenas tardes. En Centroamérica todavía es tarde, buenas noches. Ya en Estados Unidos, hoy es viernes 5 de noviembre del año 2021 y tenemos hoy el espacio dedicado para hablar de uno de los libros más importantes de la literatura centroamericana, uno de los nuevos títulos que hemos agregado a la colección de clásicos centroamericanos. Estamos hablando de El soldado desconocido de Salomón de la Selva. Este poemario interesante del cual vamos a hablar el día de hoy ha sido traducido al inglés por el académico, editor de la revista Ariel, doctor poeta también Francisco Larios, con quien conversaremos el día de hoy, junto con las poetas y académicas Margaret, Randall y Daisy Zamora, que nos acompañarán en este programa. Este programa va a ser especial, distinto a todos los demás, ¿no? Porque primero el programa estará principalmente en inglés, así que pedimos disculpas para las personas que no manejan el inglés, pero no encontramos todavía la forma de poder hacerlo con una traducción simultánea. Al final del programa vendré también para poder mantener la conversación, pero vamos a dar primero la entrada a Francisco Larios para conversar con él antes de invitar a Daisy y a Margaret para poder hablar sobre la traducción y sobre la vida y obra de Salomón de la Selva, este libro, El soldado desconocido, el nuevo libro de los clásicos centroamericanos de Casasola Editores. Bienvenido Francisco, gracias por acompañarnos, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, bien, gracias por recibirme y por supuesto, por publicar en una edición tan eh, delicadamente determinada la traducción del soldado desconocido.
Francisco, ¿por qué? Vamos a empezar diciendo, ¿no? Yo no te conocía la faceta de poeta, para ser sincero. Yo te conocía más como editor de la revista Abril y que el trabajo que has estado haciendo últimamente. Y me sorprende mucho tu trabajo como poeta y en especial la traducción de este libro. Ya habrán en este programa personas más capacitadas para poder hablar de la traducción que yo. Pero antes de poder comenzar y dar el paso a Margaret y Daisy, hablemos por qué El soldado desconocido es un libro que debe mantenerse vivo en la literatura centroamericana.
Bueno, primero es un libro en un momento que marca un inicio prácticamente para la literatura latinoamericana eh, por razones estilísticas, porque además es como el chispazo del contacto con la poesía estadounidense. Pero este es uno de los puntos de contacto de la poesía latinoamericana con la poesía de Estados Unidos, que es una poesía muy rica. Y como me decía a mí un amigo poeta el otro día, 1922, que es la fecha de publicación de este libro, prácticamente marca el comienzo de un siglo de oro en las letras latinoamericanas, ¿no? Y es el año también que sale Trilce, por ejemplo, ¿no? Eh, y bueno, aparte de eso, pues en sí es un libro de una alta calidad. Y yo creo que todo eso hace que sea parte de nuestro patrimonio y que haya que presentarlo y difundirlo.
Ok, bien. No quiero quitarle mucho tiempo porque vamos a pasar ahorita a la siguiente
Vamos a
parte
pasar
del conversatorio.
sí.
Yo tendré mis preguntas luego que termine la conversación entre tú, Margaret y Daisy. Entonces, yo lo voy a dejar ahora. Vamos a dar paso a Daisy. Zamora, como dije al principio, este conversatorio será en inglés en esta segunda parte, ¿no? Cualquier pregunta que tengan también nuestra audiencia puede conversar con nosotros a través de las redes sociales, la página de Casasola Editores en Facebook y los canales Oscar L. Estrada en YouTube y Oscar L. Estrada en Twitter. Entonces, sí, Margaret, welcome Margaret, how are you?
Having me. Thank you.
Okay, Margaret, we're gonna talk with also Daisy Zamora, who is here with us. So at this point now, I'm going to be out so you can actually talk to each other. Thank you for coming, Daisy.
Thank you, Oscar. Um, so I guess
So
I'm the
we
first one, right?
sorry, that was a mistake. Okay, we are here now. You have something that you want to read for us. So I would say let's talk about first Salomón de la Selva, who Salomón
Oh,
was, so we can all agree who this writer,
okay,
this poet, Nicaraguan poet was, and then we talk about translation with Margaret, right?
okay, thank you. Um, Salomón de la Selva is a Nicaraguan poet who was born in León, Nicaragua, and he came to the United States in 1906 when he was 12 years old. And so he adopted English to write his poetry. This is the first interesting thing about Salomón de la Selva because he is a unique and fascinating case. He wrote his first collection of poetry, Tropical Town and Other Poems, in English and published it in 1918. So his book is the first English language collection of poetry by a Hispanic writer in the US. So this makes him a very unique case. But he is unknown to many scholars and students of Latin American and Hispanic American literature. So this first book is really a book that blends both the Anglo and the Hispanic cultures and literary traditions. So we have that. This is one important aspect of Salomón de la Selva that we have to consider. Also, he came to be a poet during the he came to be part of the literary scene in the United States during the years previous and after, during and after the World War I. So the first world was World War was a very was a terrible thing that where over 9 million people were killed. Over 9 million combatants were killed and 7 million civilians in Europe. And there was a Holocaust and many other deaths. And so it was a terrible experience. And Salomón de la Selva was served in that war in the British Army. He enrolled in the American Army, but 2 months later he changed to be a soldier of the British Army. So in these years also, he comes to be a poet who has a very strong political consciousness. Why? Because he admires his adoptive country, the United States, for its humanitarian vision and its technological and artistic accomplishments, and also for its commitment to the war in Europe. But at the same time, he's a young poet that is bewildered and anger because he sees the U.S. disregard for Latin American sovereignty. And so this knowledge that he gets of the politics of the United States is what creates a paradox in his soul and as a writer. So he has this double relationship with the United States. He loves it, and at the same time, he feels that the U.S. is a powerful neo-colonial power in Latin America, because at the same time that this was happening, that the war and all these things were going on, the U.S. was invading several countries in Latin America. U.S. forces had militarily occupied Haiti, Panama, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and also had been engaged in direct interventions in the political affairs of Mexico, Honduras, Costa Rica, and Colombia. And this contradiction was in Salomón de la Selva's work through his life. This love and this sadness about his adoptive country, the United States. So on the other hand, in the literary world in Latin America, modernismo, which has been founded and mainly by Martí, Darío, and Darío had been the leader, had been the prevalent literary trend for a long period of time, but it has become it has been in decline for several years, and the avant-garde movements were not yet installed. They still didn't have an impact because the avant-garde comes after the war, the First World War, as an backlash, as a response to find new ways of artistic expression with the dissolution of the previous order of the world. So the old ways of explaining and portraying the world are no longer appropriate or applicable for the new situation of the world, because there is alienation, isolation, and these were new themes that appear in literature, and artists were looking for new ways of expression and new techniques. And so we see that in the United States appear all these new poetry, right? Carl Sandburg and Basher Lindsay and Amy Lowell and Robert Frost, William Carlos Williams, Edgar Lee Masters. So what was known as the new American poetry. So Salomón de la Selva learns about these new ways of expression from the American poets. And also, he has the knowledge of the Latin American modernista tradition. So he has this two knowledges, which makes him a unique writer in Latin America. Also, Salomón de la Selva was very active. He was in the labor movement in the United States and was secretary to labor leader Samuel Gompers, president of the AFL. And he studied in several institutions, in the educational institutions in the United States. He was in Cornell University, he was in Columbia University, and he had very well-known professors like Beltran Russell and other thinkers in the United States who influenced him. So all these things makes De la Selva a very unique writer. With the publication of The Unknown Soldier, which was published in Spanish as El Soldado Desconocido in 1922, Salomón de la Selva is the first writer in Latin America to produce a modern and avant-garde poetry in all the Spanish-speaking world. So he is a new poet with a different origin than his contemporaries, because he brings, as I said before, the poetry of both Americas in his language, the Hispanic American modernism and the new American poetry, imagism in particular, which was enough for him not only to ignore in his youth, but even to despise in his maturity the European avant-garde, because he despised all the isms, the lettrism and surrealism and creationism, and he created a different avant-garde, because he is of the other avant-garde, as Jose Emilio Pacheco says in the prologue of The Unknown Soldier, which is included in this translation, and is a very important prologue, because he says that Salomón de la Selva is not of this European avant-garde, but he is from the other avant-garde, the avant-garde of the common man, not the one of wizards or magicians and little gods. His vanguardism has its roots, and is developed in American soil. So it's parallel to those other avant-gardes, which also were popular in Latin America, but which had their roots in Europe, but were cultivated in American soil. In the case of Salomón de la Selva, his avant-garde is different. And I hope I am explaining myself clearly, because De la Selva was rooted in the tradition of both Americas, not of European tradition. And so also he is the one who inaugurates neo-popularism, even before it was used by the Spanish and Federico Garcia Lorca and the generation of 1927. So De la Selva is a precursor of what was later the avant-garde in Nicaragua. So that's true, but also he's much more than that, because he also presides modernity. He is conscious that he is building the modernity that has been initiated by the Hispano-American modernismo. So he is the creator of a new kind of poetry that was very influential in all the young poets in Latin America. El soldado desconocido, or the unknown soldier, I don't know if I mentioned that it was illustrated by Diego Rivera. And Diego Rivera is another founder of a modern art in Latin America. So it is important that to point this out, because in those years, in the 20s, in the 1920s, in Mexico and in the Caribbean and in all Latin America, the rhetorics of modernismo was still very influential. So De la Selva breaks, opens the door for a new way of expression, of poetic expression. So the door that he opens to give access to modernity to young writers was this book, the Unknown Soldier, and this book made an extraordinary synthesis of the new avant-garde forms, and also was experimental with what was later known as the conversationalist poetry and colloquialism in Latin America. So this is some of the ideas I have to point out the importance of this book. And
Daisy, I have a question. I have a question that somebody sent through the chat, and is what's the difference between the Latin American avant-garde and the European or North American avant-garde? Because you're saying the Salomón de la Selva was sort of in the middle of the two of them, but what's the difference between the two of them?
Well, the Latin American avant-garde was inspired in the European models, but it was cultivated in Latin American soil, right? It was a Latin American expression, but they were inspired by the European avant-garde, by surrealism, by Dadaism, by all the isms, right? Futurism, etc. But De la Selva, he doesn't use European models. His models are modernismo and the new American poetry. So that's why his avant-garde is different and makes him unique. And so so the De la Selva thinks that with the Unknown Soldier, De la Selva did not break or attack modernism, but modernized it and took it further. And his poetics, or his conception of the poem, his external form, as verbal creation has really a modernist root. But also, De la Selva has a modern American poetic proposal, avant-garde in his time, that comes from the Anglo-American poetry. I don't know if I have made this clear enough, right? So the poetics or the poetic conception of De la Selva has also two nutrients. The imagism in English feeds on Latin American postmodernism, and its modernity in Spanish feeds on English imagery and Spanish American modernism. So
Good.
The Unknown Soldier is human poetry, realistic, confessional, existential, even more autobiographical, that doesn't fear and rather likes to point out and present the ugly, the prosaic, the vulgar. And all this allows him to display a series of unusual motives, which are modern and different from modernism. This is how the feísmo, or the ugliness, enters in Latin American poetry because of De la Selva. And this feísmo, or ugliness, is later something that it's so appreciated by anti-poetry, the anti-poetry of Nicanor Parra, the Chilean poet in the 50s, right? And also colloquialism is introduced by De la Selva, but the ugliness and the colloquialism of De la Selva in The Unknown Soldier at the same time is decanted, purified, and very ignoble. So in The Unknown Soldier, the poet shows modernity of imaginative analogical power. For example, in his poem, The Bullet, that I wish Francisco could read it because it's beautiful. It is the soul of a bullet is presented through synesthesia. The Bullet is perhaps the avant-garde text that offers the greatest metaphorical complexity of its time. Visual images and metaphors, as well as auditory images, onomatopoeias, and other avant-garde experimentations are found in The Unknown Soldier. For example, the poem that I was looking for here in the book, the poem that is called Grenades, in the poem appears the sound of grenades dropping. And so all these are innovations that are brought by Salomón de la Selva with this book. So this book is really it is a starting point, a door that is open for a new kind of poetry. So another thing that is interesting, and this is the last thing I will say about this book, is that he recreated some Hispanic popular motifs and matters, having England and Spain as sources of American expressions and what we call Americanismo, Uh, he in the unknown soldier there are poets. There are poems that are inscribed, as I said before, in neo-popularism, but this neo-popularism has roots in German ballads and Irish and English songs. So De la Selva can be also considered as one of the initiators in Spanish language of the neo-popular tendency that had many poets, had many cultivators during the 30s, and especially his poems inspire also in these ancient songs proceeding from old literatures, widen the possibilities for Latin American experimental poetry. So we can say that De la Selva is a bilingual poet, is postmodernist in English and imagist in Spanish, because he is postmodernist in English and takes the imagist tradition into Spanish. He is culture and
I
popular.
guess all that experience in the war connected with other soldiers, like the German, I mean, the French soldiers and the British and the American soldiers in the trench in the first wars, really give him a lot of different experience, right? To write about it. I have a question for before we go to talk about the translation with Margaret, for all of you, and it is that what's very common about that time, that Central American young men enlisted in the World War I, because it reminds me in Honduras the case of Juan Pablo Wainwright, who was later the founder of the Communist Party in 1924, and he also fought in World War I with the British Army. So, but I don't know if that was common at that time. There were many soldiers, so
No,
it was weird.
no, and Salomón de la Selva, he himself says it. He says in in his foreword of the book, he says, um, Nicaragua did not have an army in Europe, but it did have soldiers, sons of hers, like me, soldiers in the allied ranks. She must also have her unknown soldier. This book is an offering that I make to that hero on behalf of my country, because his book is the unknown soldier, the soldier that dies, anonymously in all wars
Yeah, and he also
in the
mentioned in
world.
this introduction that he's not talking about the American unknown soldier. He's not talking about the British
No,
unknown soldier. He's talking about all the unknown soldiers, even the
yes,
Germans. They were at that point the enemies, the enemy
that's
army.
right. That's right, and he's very aware, and with a sharp and political sense, because he says something really, and I will end reading this part of his introduction, because he says, um, clearly neither John nor Tim nor Tommy nor Guy can be the hero of the war. The hero of the war, since a hero has to emerge, for that is why the war was fought. Every fight and every effort of men is just so that a superior man blooms. The hero of the war is the unknown soldier. He is inexpensive and he satisfies everyone. So you don't have to give him a pension. He has no name, no family, nothing, only homeland. So he says in Flanders or in France, he was a cadaver. like any other, when lo and behold, they unearthed him. They have put him with all his worms in a zinc box, tightly welded so that no bad smell escapes. This box has been placed inside a splendid bronze sarcophagus, and in a famous square in Paris or London or Rome or Washington, they have erected a magnificent catafalque that, after a great military parade in his honor, they have covered with crowns, flags, words. The peoples already have, each of them, their fetish, but that fetish was flesh and blood, human and very human. So he is aware of this human suffering, and this is what this extraordinary book is about. In the book, he is a testimonial poet. He is a poet of protest, of denunciation, and he is conversational, realistic, prosaic, narrative, and anecdotal, and refined, and traditional, and innovative, and formal, and informal. So I cannot say enough of the importance of this book, The Unknown Soldier, and I think this is this translation is a most important event for the American audience, that for the first time they will be able to read this influential and important book that changed the course of Latin American poetry and opened the doors for experimentation, a different avant-garde and modern Latin American letters.
Margaret, let's talk about the presentation.
Well, thank you. Yes, I found your exposition fascinating, Daisy. I want to say, first of all, that Jose Emilio Pacheco's notes on the other avant-garde pairs perfectly with Salomón de la Selva's long poem and Francisco's brilliant translation. The Unknown Soldier itself bears a tragic relevance also to what we are living today, not just poetically, but through the world, and particularly in his native Nicaragua, where a dictatorial duo has taken the country as its own, killing, imprisoning, or exiling anyone who threatens to get in its way. In his prologue, Pacheco addresses the idea of a nationalism without xenophobia, which I think warrants our deliberation now, not only in Nicaragua, but in a post-Trump United States. In fact, Salomón de la Selva created a poetic bridge between our two nations that continues to bear fruit. The Unknown Soldier in particular speaks to us because it's set in a time of war. And today, wars have proliferated rather than ceased. We're at war with our climate, with predatory capitalism, with colonialism, with racial and gender inequities, and with a virus that attacks, recedes, and then attacks again with ever greater force. Once again, we're isolated and alienated. And these are all states of mind and being that Salomón de la Selva addresses in this book. Translation can make or break a poet's reputation in another language. In researching de la Selva, I went to Poetry magazine under Harriet Monroe's initial editorship. I wanted to understand how de la Selva's poetry fit in with the U.S. poets who were writing and publishing at the time, who were speaking of the American idiom, meaning, of course, the North American U.S. idiom. In the pages of poetry, it was interesting to read the poem My Nicaragua in English, in the company of poems by Pound, Williams, Edna St. Vincent Millay, and other poets of those years. As Daisy explained, de la Selva wrote his early poetry in English. I wondered about this. I didn't know if this particular poem was written in English or if it was rendered by an unnamed translator, because it's taken a very long time for translation to be acknowledged as the art form it is. Proof of how it was disregarded in the early years of the past century is evidenced by the fact that translations were often published without even naming the translator. I'm awed by Larios' translation of The Unknown Soldier, and so searched for other English translations of de la Selva. I found some by Joel Whitney that were accurate in meaning, but rather flat in feeling. Larios' translation, with his knowledge of Nicaraguan culture and the poet's unique voice, gives us a rare treat in this book-length sequence of poems. The very colloquial nature of the poet's voice might seem to lend itself easily to expression in a different language, but I think just the opposite is true. Translating a colloquial voice can be extremely difficult because one must find similar forms of expression in a language that's very different from the original. The translator must create a register that does what the original did in a culture filled with idiosyncrasies ranging from colloquialisms to breathline, rhythm, sound, and which adjectives are located, and where adjectives are located, verbs, how verbs are conjugated, nouns are energized, and phrasing is constructed. Just one of the many examples can be found in one of the several poems titled The Comparison. This one's on page 134. In a footnote, Larios explains that in the original, de la Selva plays with the similarity between the words calvo and calvinista, bald-headed and Calvinist, respectively. The original reads, unas mujeres viejas y unos hombres calvos y tal vez calvinistas. Larios rendered these lines in English as some old women and some bald-headed men who are also perhaps Calvinists. There are a range of ways in which Larios might have translated these lines, which would have worked in a strictly literal version, but fallen short poetically. And his solution works perfectly. A poem written in the early years of the past century and containing lines such as, "My wife's armpits stink," must be translated by someone who really knows what he or she is doing. Larios is such a translator. So first, I'd like to ask you, Francisco, how you approached this complex translating job and what challenges you faced along the way.
Micrófono, Francisco. Gracias.
Okay. I have to say that as it frequently happens to me, I approached it fearlessly in the beginning because I didn't know what I was getting into. Because it, like you say, it seems easier on the surface, right? Although there are the modernist inspired elements, which I would expect to be more challenging. The colloquial language turned out to be probably even more challenging because I had to cross several barriers. First of all, to keep it poetic, right? Secondly, There are colloquial expressions in Spanish which are very regional from Nicaragua, but from all times. Some of the expressions I found were not even in use, and I kept asking people, and so that was a challenge as well. But I think the biggest challenge is the depth of the book. I think that once you get into the poem, you begin to find the layers and layers of perception and reality in them. This is what I like about translation, actually, that it allows me to really read a poem. But this one is it's deceitfully profound. I mean, it really hides a lot of depth. Once you start exploring it in more detail, that poses a challenge too, because you don't. Sometimes in this kind of poetry, there is the immediate language, right, that somehow conveys in its original text the message, but you don't want to translate it literally and lose the source of the impact, right? That is, it's mysteriously hidden in the words.
I was also wondering, well, what you say is exactly what I suspected as a translator myself. But I was also wondering, as you went through this amazing book and grasped the profundity of the scenario, and the relevance of that scenario for all of us today, I was wondering if you did any reading in, for example, William Carlos Williams' American Idiom, or any of the ways that the U.S. American poets of that time, of Salomón de la Selva's time, approached the English language. Was that something that you did? Was that a place that you went to, or did you just pay more attention to what was happening in Nicaragua and Central America at that time, and in Central American poetry?
I think what's strange about this book, about my translation work in this book, is that it had two phases. This I started in, maybe 9 years ago, and I did the first couple rounds of translation. I actually had a few published in modern poetry in translation, and I kind of put it away or left it there. And then after that, I did a translation of U.S. poetry into Spanish, a large project of 109 authors. Actually, there were more, but they were, some of them were cut out. And so I immersed myself in American poetry. And when I came back to El Soldado, Desconocido, the unknown soldier, I think there was a new me in the way I understood the U.S. poetry, the idiom. And Oscar is a witness to this, because he suffered through the revisions that I actually had to do, because I kept reading the translation, and I wasn't happy, really, because the new me knew something that the old me didn't know. So of course I've read William Carlos Williams and all these guys, but I think my training or my retraining to finish the book was this period of 3.5 years working exclusively on translation of U.S. poetry.
That's so interesting that you can translate in both directions. That's something that I can't do. You mentioned that some of the poems, the original translations, were published in poetry and translation and so forth. And I'm wondering if you had at any point, the difficult experience of realizing that one of those published translations needed to be improved, because I know I've had that experience. I remember that during in the 1960s, when Sergio Mondragón and I had El Cordon Plumado, we did a tremendous amount of translation. When I look at those translations today, I'm not that happy with them. And in some cases, I've gone over them and retranslated some of the work to incorporate the things that I've learned in all these decades about translation. So did that happen to you with this book?
To be honest with you, I try not to look back because I'd probably be embarrassed. Like I've been embarrassed in my own, native language, stuff I publish, and then I say, "Oh my God, why?" And then I've been very happy, exposed when some poem is rejected by a magazine, and I say, "Why aren't they publishing this great work?" And then later on, I say, "Thank God they didn't publish it," right? Because it's just the way it works, right? But I don't know specifically about the ones that appeared in MPT because I didn't go back. This was too intense, actually. Again, Oscar is aware of this. The final stretch of this was just absolutely terrifying. It was, it
Yeah,
took much longer than I would have expected, but I kept reading it and reading it and reading it and doing things over and changing stuff.
yeah.
So
I'm pretty sure it's sort of the same like writing in general or poetry, that you can keep changing it and working on it forever, and eventually you gotta let it go. But
Well, I just wanted to say that you should be very proud of this book because, we can keep on doing. I'm almost 85, and I can tell you that when you get to my age, you've published quite a few things that you wish you hadn't. But I think that what you achieved with this translation really matches the importance of the original poems by Salomón de la Selva, and it's really a rare combination of an important original work, a work that's important for poetry, that's important for the world, and just an excellent translation. So I think you should be extremely proud of the final product. It's really powerful.
I want to invite you all to talk about the next five or so minutes about the prologue of Jose Emilio Pacheco, which I think it is a very good introduction of the meaning of this book, and we all know who Jose Emilio Pacheco is, and how would you describe, Francisco, the process to get to the prologue of Jose Emilio Pacheco for this book particularly?
Okay, first of all, before we go too far, I really want to thank Roberto Carlos Perez because it was his idea actually to incorporate Jose Emilio Pacheco's prologue. And by the way, there are a couple of people that I have to thank here also because they were really very helpful with translation. One is the American poet George Franklin and the Colombian poet Jimena Gomez. Because one of the things I've learned throughout life in my different careers, right, is don't trust yourself only, right? So I always give my stuff to very very few people to lay eyes on what I'm doing. So I if it adds to the book, and I think it does, the credit goes to Roberto Carlos Perez, who's actually a very meticulous and brilliant academic, right? And it actually taught me as well because I'm I cannot claim that I am an expert on Salomón de la Selva's entire literary production. Maybe not even an expert on the Unknown Soldier. So I did actually learn from Jose Emilio Pacheco about the not just the importance of the book in terms of transmitting the influence of U.S. poetry into the Latin American literature, but Also, the differentiation of the um, avant-garde, which I really was not clear about, and which Daisy has, so brilliantly presented today.
Okay, can we take sometimes now to read maybe one or two poems from this book so the people can actually get an idea, or maybe some viewers haven't read the Unknown Soldiers. So I would say, I don't know, Francisco, you if you don't mind reading one poem in Spanish, and then maybe Margaret wants to read it in English later, the same poet, so we can have an idea of the two versions. And I would say, based on the recommendation from Daisy Zamora, let's read La Bala, which is actually one of my favorite poems of Salomón de la Selva in this book, page 65 and 64.
Okay. Well, this is actually the poem that we are taught in school in Nicaragua, or at least when I went to school, right? Okay. La bala. La bala que me hiera será bala con alma. El alma de esa bala será como sería la canción de una rosa si las flores cantaran, o el olor de un topacio si las piedras olieran, o la piel de una música si no fuese posible tocar a las canciones desnudas con las manos. Si me hiere el cerebro me dirá, yo buscaba sondear tu pensamiento. Y si me hiere el pecho me dirá, yo quería decirte que te quiero.
Margaret,
Margaret,
Would you like me to read it in English?
yes, please.
yes, please.
The bullet. The bullet that wounds me will be a bullet with a soul. The soul of that bullet will be as it would be the song of a rose if flowers could sing, or the smell of topaz if stones had a scent, or the skin of a melody if it were possible for us to touch the naked songs with our hands. If she wounds my brain, she will say, I longed to interrogate your thoughts. And if she wounds my chest, she will say, I wanted to tell you that I love you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And this is the collection of Clásico Centroamericanos is a collection that we've been working for over almost 10 years now in Casasola Editores, uh, putting together all this, we call it early Central American literature from 1879 is the first book we published to now 1950, 1949, with the idea of helping to understand the roots of our literature, which we think that nothing comes from nowhere. We have to build from somewhere, and I think understanding the literature in these clásico centroamericanos is a good base for understanding Central American. I want to thank you all from being here tonight, and I want to thank also to the team that works in Casasola Editores to make this public possible. Kenny Reyes is the designer of this cover. It's a beautiful cover that he made. And Roberto Carlos Perez, also, who is the co-editor of this book, and the whole team of Casasola Editores, who now we have the challenge of making this accessible in Central America and United States so people can actually read it. Francisco, you are going to say something also?
No, I have to emphasize that Roberto Carlos is even more meticulous than me, I think by far, to Oscar's chagrin, I guess. He makes Oscar suffer, but the no detail escapes him. So I'm very glad to have actually done this, and I love the presentation of the book, the cover, the quality. It's all perfect. It's a perfect book to handle and to read. So
Yeah, and we're gonna have also a hardcover soon And where can you get the book? Somebody's asking. The book is available in Amazon, so pretty much every single site when you buy books online now, you can buy this book. And in Honduras and Nicaragua, we are hoping to get it soon next year, hoping that the situation of our countries let us get books there. So we're gonna have them in libraries next year. So I had to finish the show. It's 9 o'clock here. Just so we know, I think it's next week, we have another Nicaraguan writer invited for our show, Joel Molina, with this wonderful, very interesting collection of short stories, Villa Pesadilla, which you all invited to see en español ahora. La próxima semana tendremos a Joel Molina con Villa Pesadilla. Conversaremos sobre este nuevo libro de cuentos para la literatura nicaragüense. Están todos invitados. Gracias, Daisy. Gracias, muchas gracias, Margaret. Muchas gracias, Francisco, por acompañarnos en este programa Casa Llena de Casasola Editores. A nombre de Casasola Editores le doy las gracias y también tengo que agradecer a las personas que nos han escrito, a Eduardo Martínez, Blas Opal, Jorge Franklin, María Gogni, Ángel Santiesteban, Ximena Gómez y Pío Martínez. Gracias por habernos sintonizado y nos vemos la próxima semana en Casa Llena de Casa Sola.